Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss creativity, entrepreneurship, and other trailblazing that enables us to distinguish ourselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I am your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps, who wishes you a happy spring. After a year that was anything but easy, Alps is committed to bringing ease to insurance. Alps is the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. That means you have direct access to your insurance team, from account managers to claims attorneys. And Alps has the simplest, most straightforward online application out there. Qualifying firms can even apply, see rates, and bind coverage all in about 20 minutes. When it comes to continuing your coverage, Alps makes that easy too, with 100% online renewal. With Alps, you can spend less time insurancing and more time innovating. Get started at applyonline.alpsinsurance.com. That's applyonline.alpsinsurance.com. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes to create and edit Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the show. My guest today is Tahmina Watson, who is the founder of Watson Immigration Law in Seattle. She is the author of the books The Startup Visa and Legal Heroes of the Trump Era. Tahmina is one of the founders of the organization Airport Lawyer, and she is now a weekly columnist for Above the Law. Tahmina, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy.
All right, so before we jump in addition to all of that, I've got to tell people that you're probably one of the most gracious people I know too, because this is actually our second go-round at this interview. Because after we did 45 minutes the last time, I figured out at the end of it that I had never hit record. So we are recording.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I get to see you more than once then.
All right. So let's start with this. You are an immigration lawyer. I would like you to tell us about yours and your family's immigration stories, because I know that now, while you didn't necessarily intend for there to be an immediate correlation between those things, I think there certainly is. So tell us about yours and your family's immigration stories.
Sure. Well, I will say that the universe has a plan for you, whether you know it or not, and then at some point you have to succumb. I was born and raised in London, UK, if you've tuned into my accent. My parents immigrated to the United Kingdom in the 60s. My dad moved in the 60s from Bangladesh to the United Kingdom for his studies. He became a lawyer over there, and in London, there's a two-track sort of profession, barristers and solicitors. My dad became a barrister. In the 70s, he married my mother, and she moved to the UK, and then, soon thereafter I was born. But in the 80s, my father actually wanted to go back to Bangladesh, so we actually moved back. And in the early 90s, so for a whole 10 years, I lived in Bangladesh and then came back to London. So born and raised in London and Bangladesh, and then came back to London, finished law school, practiced as a barrister for a couple of years, and then moved to Seattle, Washington, and had to go through the immigration process myself. And what's interesting about immigration law, it's so complicated. I was a lawyer in the UK, a barrister as well, and my husband, who is a patent attorney in the United States, we were both looking through the USCIS website, and not all of it made sense. And so we had to hire an immigration attorney to help us through our own immigration process. But what was interesting about that journey is I became an immigrant overnight, not necessarily intending to, but I didn't know at the time how much that experience was going to help me in my near future. And during that time, I was taking the bar exams. I took the New York bar exams, and we have lawyers as the audience here, and they'll appreciate this. When you come from a common law country, you can take the New York bar exams or the Californian bar exams. At that time, I don't know if laws have changed since, you couldn't take anything else, any of the other, 48 states bar exams otherwise. And so I took the New York bar exams knowing I would be living in Washington State, but naively thought there could be an asterisk near my name and I could practice law. But it's not as simple as that, because I didn't really know 50 states had 50 different laws. And so eventually immigration law kept following me, and my own immigration lawyer who was filing my case needed some immigration law help in her practice, and she had mentioned it, but I wasn't really forthcoming with it. I didn't specifically want to practice immigration law. I'd seen my father practice as an immigration lawyer in the UK, and in my mind it was very much only a community oriented practice. It was only asylum and humanitarian issues that would pull at my heartstrings. And I wanted to do something a little bit different than that. But, the third time immigration law came my way, I thought, oh, I'll just give in. I'll just do this and then wave into Washington State 5 years later. But day one, I realized how interesting immigration law is. I didn't really appreciate my experience would give me the firsthand experience necessary or nice to have in any type of practice. But my immigrant background, my cultural upbringing, my living in Bangladesh and traveling, I, truly could relate to the people that I was seeing. And what I realized is it doesn't have to be asylum day in, day out. It could be anything you want. Immigration is so broad. You could be just doing business immigration every day. You could be doing asylum every day. You could be going into courtrooms every day. You can pick and choose. And what I learned over time is I have a knack for being a good business immigration lawyer. And that came with having my own law firm, which started in January 2009, because suddenly you have to file your taxes and you have to have a business license and you have to be in HR and PR and everything else under the sun. And I could relate to the people that were coming to me who were opening businesses from different countries or trying to recruit people from different countries. And I could relate to the business and the employer, and I could also relate to the employee coming. Similarly, for family-based immigration, husband, wife, child, parent, my husband sponsored me as a US citizen. I had to go through that issue. But I also faced all the, delays and the frustrations and the border security, all of the things that my clients say to me. I can absolutely put myself in their shoes and empathize in a very real way, which distinguishes me from, somebody saying, well, I just understand. And so that's how I fell into immigration law, and I've loved it since. I have to tell you, since your audience are lawyers, I didn't wave into Washington State for a very long time because I realized I don't have to. Immigration is a federal law area, and Washington State allowed me to practice. I did eventually wave in, and by the time I did, I had to study for the bar exams. It wasn't as simple as filing papers, and that was just a few years ago. And I have to tell you, having practiced for several years, studying for the bar was not fun. I studied a little, I forgot everything I read, and, life kicks in. And so my husband, bless him, he booked me a hotel room for the weekend, took the kids away. And then I thankfully passed the bar that I needed to do. And here we are.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you kind of a bigger question that I think, based on your unique personal history, you'll be really qualified to offer an interesting perspective on. The United States is a nation of immigrants. There's such a small percentage of the population that can trace their ancestry back further than being on this continent for 400 years. So why is immigration policy an important part of the United States story?
That's such a great question. And I would suggest that people look at history books, but there's also a particular history documentary on the History Channel called America, the Story of Us. And, as an immigrant, I had to learn a lot of things, and I can't say I know everything, but I know enough to be able to answer this question. Immigrants came to the United States fleeing persecution, starting from Jamestown all the way to today. And the settlements and all of the things that happened since, immigrants created this country brick by brick, rail track by rail track. Immigrants are part of the history. And what's happened over time, people have forgotten all the historic the stories that we have that seamlessly fit into who we are today. And by that, notion that these people are us, you forget they're immigrants. So some examples: Nordstrom, the department store, he was a Swedish immigrant. Levi's, the jeans, that is a worldwide name. He's a European citizen who came to United States dirt poor and started these jeans because people who are mining in those times needed a strong pants. And that's how that happened. And if you go back into, mid-century or even early 1900s, New York became this city, this tall city, because of aluminium and the steel, how that was made, manufactured to be easily manufactured, but also easily accessible and affordable. And I think it was Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant, who was able to do that. Similarly, Bose, we're both wearing headsets. Bose is a headset that's world renowned. He's an Indian immigrant. Now, if you fast forward to, a decade ago, Facebook came along. He had an immigrant co-founder. If you think about PayPal, if you think about WhatsApp, if you think about the last 12 months of how our lives have been under COVID, you and I are speaking through Zoom. We would not have this ease of communication or ease of seeing our doctors or anything, schooling. These are immigrant founded companies. Zoom, the Zoom founder is a Chinese immigrant whose visa was denied 8 times, actually.
Wow.
If you think about remote schooling, the trail was blazed by Salman Khan's Khan Academy, who is a
Yeah.
second generation immigrant. If you think about our groceries, the one place we could go under COVID was the grocery store. And those shiny apples, who were picking them? These were immigrants from Mexico. And so our entire infrastructure is maintained, created, often maintained a lot of times by immigrants. We are so the word I guess I'm looking for is I don't know if I have a word for it, but essentially immigrants are part of the fabric of our country, and we're forgetting that particularly because of the last 4 years. But the policies have always come with challenges. If you think about the rail tracks, those came along, and when they were all done from East Coast to West Coast, suddenly we have a Chinese Exclusion Act. If you fast forward the clock a little bit further down, we had immigration quotas for all Asians, actually. And then, in the 1950s, when immigration laws were passed, it didn't come without challenges. It came soon after the civil rights, fights that we had in this country, and we have seen a reigniting of emotions from those eras. You come in the last 4 years. And so the policies have come with a lot of challenges, and but what we forget is why immigrants are necessary in this country.
So one of the things you've written about is that the United States is losing talented immigrants to other countries, and they're deciding to go elsewhere, where historically for the last couple hundred years, this has been kind of the destination. You wrote about that in your book, The Startup Visa. I think most of us probably don't know what a startup visa is. I certainly didn't until I had read about it. So tell us what the startup visa is and why you advocate for it and how it can become a part of immigration policy that helps us be a destination for talented immigrants.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I will say that I wrote that book in 2015, and I am currently working on the second edition that will come out in the summer. So, what is a startup visa? A visa that is specifically for founders of startup companies. Now, what we hear often from people is, well, we have all these different visa categories. Why don't they work? They don't work because laws that were set in the 1950s were based on life as it were in the 1950s. If you think about, Back to the Future, that movie, how many things in that movie have come true today? Every time I see the Tesla car and I see the door fling open sideways, I can't help but think about that movie because it seemed like a far-fetched, notion at the time. Or, talking and having video conferencing. That movie alone is a testament to how far we've come, but our laws have not changed. And what's important to know is technology has modernized how people operate businesses, how innovation happens. Now you can innovate in Timbuktu and have $1 million business with consumers in America. The destination is still America. But what's happened is people are not able to come in. Therefore, other countries are saying, well, come here, we're going to make it easy for you. And so the startup visa was introduced in Congress in 2010 as a bill specifically for founders, entrepreneurs, but it never really went anywhere. And at the time, I had just started my law firm in 2009, Watson Immigration Law. And you might remember it was one of the worst recessions we'd seen until, COVID came along. And what happens with employment-based immigration is that if you are on a work visa and you're terminated, or you quit, or you're laid off, you are immediately illegal in this country, even if your visa is valid. And I live in Seattle. It's a tech hub with, world-renowned companies with their headquarters here. People were being laid off and they came to me saying, hey, I got laid off. What do I do? And, I had to figure out how to, help them maintain their status. But what I heard repeatedly was people saying, I've always wanted to have my own company. And I said to every single one of them, I'm going to research. And soon thereafter, the startup visa bill had dropped. And eventually I wrote the book in 2015 because comprehensive immigration reform died in 2013, where the Senate had actually passed the bill, but the House didn't even get it to the floor. And it's very important, and particularly now, as COVID had shown us, we have millions, I think in 2020, about 50 million people were out of work. How do you create jobs? You need innovation, you need technology to be utilized. You need people who are hungry to create their own dreams and dreams for others. And so the startup visa's notion is not just to give a visa, but have conditions attached to it. Either you've raised money from investors, angels or venture capital funds, or you have invested your own money, but you also have to create jobs. Various bills had various terms, starting from 3 to 5 to 10 jobs. And that's what we need. And the moment is now to actually have a bill, which is why I am waking up every morning and posting sunrise pictures, but really writing about the necessity and the urgency of this visa now, because none of the visas we have now are concretely targeting the new ways of creating and starting businesses.
All right. So you've mentioned a couple of times during the interview how things have been different in the last 4 years, going back to January of 2017, than how they'd been under the Obama administration. So I know that particularly in January of 2017, right after President Trump took office, executive orders were signed that really caused some difficulties and changes. And so tell me about, I know we all remember seeing lawyers and folks, because of the travel bans, stuck at airports and lawyers trying to figure out what to do and how to help them. And you were involved in part of that. So tell me about the work that lawyers did in airports in January of 2017 and what your role was, and kind of give us some context for what was happening then.
Well, Jeremy, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. with the audience of lawyers, particularly because I have been wanting to talk about this to lawyers. And secondly, for asking about this question. When November 2016's election was lost, that's how I refer to it, it brought a lot of anxiety to me and to everybody I know. There was anxiety about all the rhetoric that was discussed during the campaign trail about giving nasty names to immigrants, to what the ex-president would do, including having mass deportation and a Muslim ban. And so during that time, just to backtrack just a little bit, between 2015 and 2016, soon after I wrote the Startup Visa book, I had the incredible privilege of being one of the people in Hillary Clinton's immigration working group for her presidential campaign. So every month there'd be a call, I'd have a Clinton file talking about what the immigration policies would be in the first 100 days. And when the election was lost, I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, we're not going to have immigration reform in the first 100 days, but also what's going to happen to all the immigrants. I'm brown, I'm from a minority group with many, many different minority hats, and an immigration lawyer where I'm dealing with minority communities. I absolutely did have fear. So after crying for a week and having dinners with friends and sort of really commiserating and thinking, what are we going to do? I realized that nobody around me was saying everything's going to be okay and this is what we should do. And the words of Mahatma Gandhi really did circle around my head: be the leader you want to see. When you're in crisis, you want somebody to say it's going to be okay, regardless of whether it's going to be okay or not. You sort of need to hear it. But I wasn't hearing that. And I had a live radio show at the time, which is now a podcast, called Tahmina Talks Immigration. I was already writing a lot, and I'm very much entrenched in my community. And so I was in a good position to say to people, hey, if you need immigration lawyers, I will be able to help. I'm part of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we have a chapter here in Washington State. So I was using November to January as a time to just lay the groundwork of we're here, because I could already envision anybody who's anyone running an organization, policymaker, lawmakers, they're going to need immigration assistance. And so fast forward the clock to January 27th, 2017, it was a Friday afternoon. That's when the news came that there's an executive order banning travel. And what that meant is people who are flying, who are airborne, people who had just landed, people who are boarding planes in different countries, suddenly everybody's banned. Some people didn't even know, they got off the plane and didn't know why they couldn't get out of the plane. The planes were circling the tarmac. And so my phone blew up, my email blew up, people saying, hey, I have a cousin, family member, a member of our organization stuck. What can we do? So I suddenly went into work mode because, it's unprecedented. I didn't even realize how big it was. I just sat there starting to take notes. How am I going to deal with this? But I also, I forgot to mention, as part of the Washington State chapter, I was able to lead the creation of a committee called Response Committee, and we had about 30 members who joined that. And so that day, some members had gone to the airport, just randomly looking at the news, going there, because we didn't have an organized method quite yet. And so lawmakers started to call me, or people within the lawmakers, entities. But organizations, particularly the Council of American and Islamic Affairs, Relations, CARE Washington, they had a lot of members on the ground in airports, in airplanes, stuck, not just here around the country. And my email was blowing up. I mean, I think what us as lawyers, your audience too, will remember that we really felt an assault on the law itself. Like, how can the law be abused in this way with just an executive order? People's due processes were being taken away. You cannot have people banned from a country in this way without Congress doing something. And so that's why we saw lawyers flock to the airports around the country. The news was dominated with lawyers sitting on the floor, writing motions and briefs right there. What happened in Washington State is that was a Friday. I don't remember moving from my desk until Tuesday. Frankly, I don't remember sleeping much, except for Sunday. I went to the rally that was held here, and it was just heads. I think there were 10,000 people there. My first rally speech. I was a little nervous, but I was so fired up. Um, so that's what happened. An airport lawyer came along because, and just to make sure people know, it's not an organization; it's a web portal. And it was created by, there were 5 co-founders. Greg McClawson is an immigration attorney here in Washington State. Takao Yamada, also an attorney, a non-practicing, who's an entrepreneur himself. And 2 tech companies, Clio and Neotologic, who had gone to Greg saying, we want to help. But what was happening over the weekend is I was just figuring out, how do I do intake? I can't keep up with the calls that were coming in. So I started to use Google Forms. And so when the co-founders sort of came together, I said, here's my Google Forms. I don't know how to do this, but they took that and magically, came up with airport lawyers. And so that's what happened. And by the following weekend, airport lawyers was connected to 25 airports around the country, and volunteer lawyers like yourself, Jeremy, who are not immigration lawyers, everybody was on the roster. And what happened in Washington State, Lane Powell is a renowned law firm here. They started to create a roster of immigration lawyers, paralegals, non-immigration lawyers, anybody in the legal profession. And when they knew I was coordinating the immigration lawyers, we had about 50 lawyers sign up, and they became the experts. And that went on daily for a good 6 months, because as you might remember, the Supreme Court eventually allowed the 3rd iteration of the ban to actually stand, because there were many, lawsuits that had put a stay on the 2nd iteration. But the 3rd one, was made to look like a non-Muslim ban, if that makes sense, because they managed to add Venezuela and North Korea to it. And the Supreme Court at the time said, we're staying within the 4 corners of the executive order, not really looking at the, rhetoric and all that went into it. But that led it to many other ways in which lawyers who are not immigration lawyers and immigration lawyers to come together and collaborate.
All right. So that, I guess, probably served as the jumping off point for so much of the work that you've done over the last 4 years in combating immigration policy. I know that you were specifically involved in once some detention facilities opened up in Washington State in 2018 and family separations that were occurring there. So just kind of tell me more of your story about what was involved after the travel ban, after the Muslim ban. What was happening next for you and folks in Washington?
Well, what was interesting at the time is once, as the travel ban was going on and we needed to get lawyers to the airport or be at the end of a call for a non-immigration lawyer, at the same time, legal clinics were calling me too. And what I want to remind your audience is that there were 2 executive orders signed 2 days before the travel ban. And those sort of faded into the background for a while because we were just dominated by the travel ban. But one of them was border security and the other one was interior enforcement. So both CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, as well as immigration enforcement, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, were both, actively getting out there and apprehending people. And what happened on the ground in the communities where people were scared. There are many undocumented people, not just in Washington State, around the country, but they have mixed status families, green card holder, citizen spouses and children. They're taking them to school and then getting apprehended, as they drop the child off. And many of your listeners will remember those heartbreaking stories. And so these organizations were saying, well, we need to also do Know Your Rights presentations. So not only were immigration lawyers as the experts being called to the airports, they were also pulled in different directions. And the the important thing to realize is immigration lawyers like you and me, we have our own practices, and our practices were blowing up too because these policies were suddenly um, blowing up, not in like we were making a lot of money. It was more like, oh my gosh, the stress is outrageous because our cases were suddenly being scrutinized in ways that we'd never seen before. The clients were calling incessantly about what's going to happen to my case. So the stress level overnight became unbearable. And so these lawyers in Washington state, we have about 550 immigration lawyers. Of those, 25% actually volunteered over and over again. But of those 25%, the the volunteer desire was dwindling because you simply couldn't. You have 24 hours in the day, and there's only so much you can do. And so I started to see that dwindle over the next 6 to 8 months. But what I was seeing at the same time was lawyers like yourself, Jeremy, and particularly lawyer mothers. I'm in various Facebook groups and other communities where the outrage was just growing and people were wanting to help, but we don't want to have a malpractice suit on our hands. So we're the most risk averse, profession there is. And so not everybody wanted to go out there and work on a case that could get them in trouble, particularly knowing that somebody's life is truly at risk. There is a quote by a judge, immigration judge, who says, immigration court is like traffic court with death penalty as a result, because it seems like it's not that formal, except your life really is at risk. And so I've started to think about, this was about April 2017, how do I bring this energy of the non-immigration lawyers and group them with the immigration lawyers to expand the scale of help that is necessary in the community. And as I was thinking about this, it took a good 18 months, but fast forward the clock to April 2018, the news about the separation of babies, as small babies and children from their parents had hit the news, and it was confirmed. And of those, about 200 of them eventually were brought to Washington state. We do have a detention facility here, but it was always full. And so they had to go to a federal prison actually to house these people. But that's when it became clear that I need an organization. And what's interesting is I have a practice. I have my own clients. So my nighttime and all my non-spare time was donated to this. And I didn't want a nonprofit on my hands. I wanted to have somebody take this idea and run with it. But what I realized is nobody could see the vision I had and why this was necessary. And eventually I did have 4 other co-founders, one of whom is Takao Yamada, who was part of the lawyer efforts. But we created an organization called Washington Immigrant Defense Network, where we trained non-immigration lawyers like yourself in substantive legal subject matter for removal defense, the actual laws for using in the courtroom, but also bringing in the immigration lawyers at a compensation, which was researched to find the right number. And they would run the case, supervise the non-immigration lawyers who were donating their time pro bono. And then we eventually started to only represent detained people in trials, because what happens in detention and immigration court particularly, there's no right to counsel. There are no funds for it. And, the pro bono lawyers that take them are not necessarily those who are very experienced, and those who are very experienced can't take that many cases. And so in Washington state, we have a renowned nonprofit called Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project. Bless them. They have done so much work to keep us going over the last 4 years. And so we essentially partnered with them to say, give us your complicated cases, keep the pro bono ones, the ones that pro bono lawyers will take, but give us the complex ones that nobody else will take. And so that was established in 2018 on the heels of the separation of parents situation and continued to date. Obviously, for COVID, courts were closed, so we're sort of in a hiatus situation. But it's a novel concept in the sense that it's not been formalized in the way that we have done it, as far as I know, because we are paying our immigration lawyers to go into court and take other lawyers. And what's important for people to know is a lot of people said to me, "Why aren't you taking law students?" But Jeremy, having practiced as a lawyer for years, you know how to handle a client, how to write a brief, what information is necessary for a declaration, how to submit it, how to present it to a court, and all of the things that we couldn't train you as a law student. So you were already trained as a lawyer. We just needed to give you the substantive legal guidance. And so that's what we found. And we have some amazing, incredibly inspiring lawyers who are part of the Wyden team. And I would love for people to read the book, which came out of it. And there is another part I need to mention, but the book is called Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. Not only is it my story, it's about 13 other legal heroes that I refer to them as. These are lawyers like you and me, who basically stepped up in crisis. What's interesting about the way I chose these people, not only had I worked with them closely, or seen them closely from afar, if that makes any sense, I wasn't working with them. These people really stepped up to lead or inspire or get out of their comfort zone to take action. And the background of these lawyers, I wanted to have them varied. So any of your listeners, for example, could relate to any one of them. In-house lawyer, big law lawyer, solo lawyer, nonprofit lawyer, the Attorney General of Washington State, the executive director of ACLU of Washington, the executive director and founder of Lawyers for Good Government, retired lawyer, a non-practicing lawyer. All of these backgrounds will absolutely speak to any one of your listeners, because often what I found and realized profoundly is, in crisis, not only do you need to hear everything's going to be okay, but you're also asking somebody to tell you what to do because you just don't know which way to go. And these lawyers really stepped up and then either led or inspired, say, I am going to go and join your effort. So it's really a story about inspiration, but also about lawyers really understanding that we became lawyers for a reason, not just ideological reasons, but this was the time to step out and say, I am a lawyer because I am an officer of the court. And all of these people will demonstrate that. So my work really was finding ways to bring novel solutions, because in crisis, you've got to find new ways to serve because the old way doesn't work anymore. And out of that came out legal clinics too, which the city of Seattle, one of the collaborators, is calling it a legal innovation. Because the same thing happened, over time, that legal clinics could not find the pro bono attorneys that they relied on. Experienced attorneys that would go in and speak to their membership once a month, they just didn't have the bandwidth anymore. And when I was trying to raise funds for Wyden, I could hear these legal clinic organizers saying, I can't get lawyers. And I was thinking to myself, well, of course, I know why. And so that Wyden concept, I was building on it, thinking, what do I do? And I realized that compensation is key. If I can find a way to make sure that the lawyer, often small solo law firm lawyer who is, donating their time, they can't afford it. And what does that mean? What people don't understand is pro bono is not pro bono for the lawyer. Pro bono is not pro bono for the organization organizing it. It's pro bono assistance for the client who is getting that legal advice, but a lot of time, effort, energy, and money has to go into creating those processes. And so for the solo small firm lawyer, they have their own bills to pay, their own mortgage to pay, their staff to pay. And so we've came up with a number, and there's a longer story to this, but in short, these legal clinics provide a small stipend and allows these legal clinics, and we've only done two particular ones, but they have already set the standard for what could come in the future.
Well, I appreciate you shedding light on the work that lawyers are doing that is literally fundamentally changing lives. A year or two ago, I guess it was almost 2 years ago, I got to sit in on a presentation by Fred Gray, and he's one of the lawyers who worked with Rosa Parks and worked in the 1950s and 60s in the early years of the civil rights movement and getting that underway, and talking about all the lawyers he worked with in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, and the work that they did and the opportunity that we as lawyers can have uniquely to create change is just really inspiring, because I know for so many of us, like most of the work that I do deals with car wrecks, and I'm hired by corporations to represent them and represent their insureds, and so much of that doesn't feel like it has a lasting impact that changes lives. And so to be able to read about others in the profession who are having those opportunities and even creating those opportunities and affecting policy is just really great.
Well, I will say that you are making a difference in the lives of the people you're helping. And I think every single lawyer has an impact in this world. So, I think what you're doing is great too.
All right. You touched on this a minute ago. You wrote in Legal Heroes in the Trump era that the biggest lesson you've learned in the last couple of years is that, I'm going to quote you to yourself here, unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions. We must be open to new paths. We must be creative and collaborative. And certainly you've talked a great deal about the collaborative nature of the projects you're working on. Can you give me an example of the creative problem solving that you implemented and how it affected change?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Maybe I'll just take the legal clinic example. So what I was seeing with the situation unfolding is that the demand for immigration advice had shot up. And we all know why that was happening, part of what we discussed, but so many things that we can't discuss because of time limitations. But essentially, every community needed immigration help. And there was one particular South Asian community organization that was relying on a minority bar association lawyers to come to them to give them monthly time for their legal clinics pro bono. And I was on that very listserv too, and I could see every month, and it was happening to me, you would ask once and you'd get 5 lawyers. But over time, you'd ask once and you'd get 0. And so you have to keep asking until you get 1. And that was, dwindling. And sometimes people would sign up and not turn up. And there are several problems with why they wouldn't. They have their own deadlines. Traffic is terrible if you're doing this in person. And again, time is money, and time away from family. Often legal clinics are in the evenings when you have children who need to be fed and bathed and read to, or, so many other things. And so when I went to these roundtables where I was looking to raise funds for Wyden, and I heard these legal clinics say I couldn't get lawyers, it dawned on me about the compensation aspect. But I couldn't take it anywhere because, I've got so many projects going on and my own caseload and deadlines. And my practice, by the way, also had a lot of issues because I do business immigration, and you might remember the ex-president saying, well, immigrants take our jobs away. And when you hear rhetoric in the news, please know that every single case was affected by it in some way or another. And it was demonstrated by extra requests, extra scrutinizing. Almost every case came with, extra scrutinizing and deadlines. And so this particular legal clinic eventually came to me, the executive director, her name is Lalita Upala. She came and said to me, Tahmina, I have some money aside. I really need lawyers. Please help me. And I said, yes, I've been waiting for this moment. And so then we had to brainstorm how much money she has, how could we stretch the budget, what is the right number to have people say yes, but not too high that the budget is not used enough. And so, I've been learning so many things because, I don't necessarily think about stretching the budget as such in my day day job. I'm just, and maybe I've learned to be a better business person. I don't know. But I realized also efficiency is important for me. I can't do the same thing 10 times because it's not efficient on my own time. And so when she said that, and it was June 2018 or May 2018, I looked at the calendar and I said, okay, this is how much money you're going to pay. It's $100 an hour. And we created a system of how this would be done. Lalita and I brainstormed about that, and it would be 2-hour shifts for per month. And I looked at the calendar and I saw 6 months, and I know 6 months will go by so easily. So I created an 18-month calendar of 18, and I realized I could easily get 18 people, I'm sure, if I keep nagging. And I became the pest on our listserv. If people don't know me by face, they definitely know I'm the nagger or the pest on the listserv. So I managed to get 18 people on the roster and then handed it over to them and only troubleshot as necessary. And it went swimmingly. They had the lawyers they needed. Their membership got their help that they needed. And fast forward the clock to December 2020, they came back and said, we raised more money and I need double the lawyers. And so for 2021, I only did a 12-month program roster, and I got 24 lawyers for them because they saw the value. They told their grant funders about it, and they saw the success. And it's just such a proud moment, not just for me, but everybody involved, the lawyers who participated, the organization that created and collaborated with the solution. Because as far as I know, this is the first real paid stipended legal clinic. But what was interesting is the city of Seattle has an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs department. And when DACA was taken away by the ex-president, that program was hanging by a string at the Supreme Court. And it was wildly believed that DACA would go away. So around the country, people were preparing for it. In our local area, the city of Seattle was leading the charge of how do we prepare for the event in which many, many, many people could face deportation. And so with the example of this legal clinic, the city of Seattle essentially created and molded it into a larger program. And I actually just got nominated the first vice president of the King County Bar Association. I was just a board member at the time. And the King County Bar Association stepped in because they have neighborhood legal clinics. It's one of the reasons this not one of the reasons, but one of the core programs of the Bar Association. So they stepped in and said, yes, we will house the legal clinics for you. So we became a triangle, if you like, of this project with the city of Seattle funded and sponsored and brainstormed in how this would work. The KCBA housed the legal clinics and processed everything that was necessary, and the immigration lawyers came in and participated. And so that was, again, there were 5 legal clinics over a 5-month process. And by then COVID came along. I mean, there are some articles I can share with you because there were twists and turns at every step, going from venue to COVID to how do we do this, what video program we use. But we were able to serve 200 plus people that needed this help, with about 80 lawyers who signed up and eventually 50 actually served. And so that's an example. But what's interesting is that you need people who will step out of their comfort zone to actually say, yes, I'll try this. Or you have to be brave enough to say, well, I'm just going to do this to see how it's going to go, because you don't know any better. I don't know better, I know that, but I'm willing to give this a try. And what's interesting is when you're trying something new, you will have a lot of people who are afraid of the new or apprehensive of the new, and you've got to charge ahead. And I've learned those lessons. So I feel very proud of all the things that I've done, but more importantly, I'm proud of our community. I'm proud of the Immigration Lawyers Association, particularly in Washington State, who said yes every time. The community came to me and I became the voice for that. And so we have demonstrated that if communities stand strong and come together in the skills that they have and use them willingly in the way that it can be maximized, you can make a difference.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the last 4 years. So I'm going to look forward with this next question. What are indications, if we have any yet, as you and I sit here in April of 2021, of what immigration policy is going to look like under the Biden administration?
Well, I have to say I can sleep much better now, knowing that my Friday nights are not going to come down with bad news, because that's what happened under the previous administration. So right off the bat, he took away the Muslim ban and revoked other or rescinded various other executive orders. But we have real enthusiasm, desire, and leadership for change, not just immigration, but everything. COVID is an example of how this leadership is getting us shots in our arms. But from an immigration policy perspective, he has got Congress looking at an immigration reform bill, comprehensive immigration reform bill. So my hope is that we do see change. And I'm very grateful to Above the Law publication that has given me the opportunity to write about my opinions and views and thoughts about what I'd like to see change. But there's so much that needs to be changed. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, the laws of this country were from 1950. And just to give a quick chronology, 1952 is the basic foundation of the Immigration and Nationality Act. It had amendments in 1965 and then 1990. And then in 2001, there were some changes, but we haven't really seen a major overhaul. And it's time. It's time, and it's time for our country. Again, going back to what we talked about, how immigrants are making a difference. Every head is money. It's money for the national treasury, the pocket of the country, and this money can go to infrastructure, education, healthcare, so much more. There are undocumented immigrants in this country who are generating billions of dollars in tax funds. They can't actually take those benefits, unlike what the rhetoric has been so far. Immigrants cannot access those funds that they actually put into the treasury. Our social security funds are actually still alive because of the funds that undocumented immigrants put in those into taxes. And so those numbers are staggering. I don't have them at hand. I wish I did. But if you go to the New American Economy, there's a website for a think tank, New American Economy. They have numbers that are calculated for your county even. So whichever district you live in, anywhere in the country, if you go to that website, they can tell you the immigrant contribution. So for example, Washington State is the 8th largest dairy producer, 10th largest agriculture producer, but more than 51% of the workers are immigrants. It goes with healthcare, the doctors we see that, oh my goodness, a big shout out to all the immigrant health professionals in the last 14 months that have stepped up. The nurses, the para professionals, the doctors, a lot of them are Indian doctors who are actually stuck in the green card backlog, something that I'm writing about, which will be my third book. Actually, I'm currently part of I'm writing on multiple books, but this is one of them where these H-1B holders, a lot of them are, that came under scrutiny. And so we need our laws to reflect the times that we live in. And we have real hope for that because we have a Senate that has the Democrat, 50-50. We have House, a majority with Democrats, and we have the White House. And so there is real possibility. But what I will say to anybody listening is that you are the voice of whatever it is that you feel passionate about. And you've got to make sure that your senator, your representative hears your voice because they are representing you. And we do have a lot of opposition. The noise, the anti-immigration noise hasn't necessarily reduced, in any way, shape or form. But we have to be able to push through those. So again, unprecedented times call for unprecedented solutions.
All right. So you have already published 2 books. You're working on a second edition of The Startup Visa. You're working on another book altogether. You write for Above the Law. Why has writing become an important part of what you do?
I think about this sometimes because I was never necessarily a good writer and I never thought of myself as a writer. And my first experience of writing was blogging. I've been blogging since 2008. But I will say, and this is probably a tip for newer lawyers listening to your show, um, now is video blogging, but in 2008, blogging was a thing. And I knew I needed to blog, but I didn't know what to blog about. And I opened my blog, it was blank, and I'd stare at it and I'd close it. It happened for months. I didn't know what to do with it. But then I came across this book, I forget the name of it, PR something or another. And I remember opening it somewhere in the middle at a random airport, which said, oh, you could comment on things happening. I thought, oh my gosh, I could comment on immigration law. So that was the beginning of writing on the blog. And soon thereafter, a South Asian newspaper started in Washington State, and the editor called me saying, can you write some pieces for me? And I said, well, I don't know what to write about. I was just blogging. And he just told me topics. He said, write about how somebody can be a citizen, or, how do you get your green card? And he gave me topics every week, and that's how I started writing. But it didn't really become something I took seriously as such. I was blogging because I really loved it. I knew more than my clients, and I was writing for my clients. But it was interesting going to a law conference, having a couple of lawyers saying, oh, Tahmina, the article was so good. And I didn't realize lawyers were reading my blog. And I was volunteering everywhere. Somebody would say volunteer, and I'd say yes to everything. Soon I had to learn how to say no, by the way, but I was saying yes to everything. And that became part of what I was writing about. So fast forward the clock, to what was happening under the previous administration. I needed to tell my clients what was going on. I couldn't call every single client and say, hey, look how H-1Bs are getting extra scrutiny, or hey, there's going to be a ban on this particular thing. I had to inform and educate in real time quickly. I started to do a newsletter. There's only so much you can do. But since this administration has come into office, I feel very strongly about change. I believe that my knowledge, my experience, my background, all of these are well fitted to express the changes that I want to see. And so I have now firmly accepted I'm a writer. I have an amazing editor. Without her, I would not be able to do the writing I do. But I have so much to say because I genuinely want to be able to inform and educate those who don't understand it. Immigration law is so complicated. I've learned to distill it in simple ways because I have to explain it to my clients. But what I realized is you, Jeremy, your audience, you don't know immigration law. The way I explain it to my clients is exactly the way I should explain it to you. Because just because you're a lawyer, I don't have to use legal jargon. And, my editor helps me. I do slip into jargon all the time, and she'll help me make sure that, this is a legal term. What does it really mean? Or, as you know, Jeremy, you talk about things that you know about and you assume others know, but you can't get out of your own head to see how you need to simplify it. And so I have learned to simplify these complicated things so that the community can understand. So I love writing. I think 2021 is my year of writing because after writing my second book, I still didn't think of myself as a writer, but now I do believe that I am. And so I love it.
I think that's funny because I've experienced the same thing. Is you get a couple books out there and it's more than most people will ever write or even have any aspiration to do, but you don't think of yourself in those terms yet. Something you said a minute ago is that you have so much to say, and I found that true for myself. That the more I write, the more I actually have to say, and the more ideas that keep coming. I keep a little moleskin notebook that I write ideas down in. Sometimes it's like a snippet or a title idea, or, if I have a dream that I want to make sure I remember, I write it down. And it was just kind of spread all over the place. So finally, I'm a nerd and I created a spreadsheet for all my book and story ideas and all those snippets, and realized that, I've got over 20 ideas for books that I want to write or stories that I want to write. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have time to not be writing anymore. I've got too much to say. So I can really identify with that.
Yeah, and I have to say, I find a kindred spirit in you. And, when you started the Claw Alliance, I had been looking for lawyers that I could collaborate with, ask questions to, because I feel as though us lawyers are not necessarily the writer that is born from a journalist background. We are talking about things that we see every day, and we don't have the know-how of where to publish, how to publish, what are the tricks and tips to writing, but I didn't have a lot of people in my life that I could ask these questions to. And so you have created this platform and support group, and I'm just so grateful. But what I have found in you is I have also started to keep a spreadsheet, and so I'm glad that you have said that you're doing that. But also, it's the morning. I've embraced it. It's my time where the kids are not stomping around and crying and yelling. My email isn't just, pinging every minute. It's my quiet time to really think and think about how I want to express myself. So,
Yeah.
I'm just very grateful I met you.
So I haven't actually mentioned Claw Alliance here on the podcast before. So let me briefly tell people what it is. It is a community for creative lawyers, and Claw stands for creatives, lawyers, artists, and writers. You can go to clawalliance.com if you are a lawyer who is pursuing creative things, or even just has aspirations to and want to talk to and hang out with other lawyers who are doing that. Go to clawalliance.com, join it. There's some member benefits that are available. And it's just a place to share information and amplify each other's work and kind of figure out this creative pursuits that we're doing. And let me ask one more question. I don't know if you think of yourself as a creative person, but have you found that writing and podcasting has enabled you to connect your creativity to your career in a way that you weren't able to do otherwise?
That's a really good question. I think I always wanted to be a lawyer. That's all I wanted in my life. I wanted to be a barrister. I wanted to wear the wig and gown, and life brought me to America, and I was able to pursue myself as a lawyer. But I never thought of myself as a creative. But what's interesting is COVID has allowed me to give words to the things I was doing already. I was doing them because I wanted to inform and educate. So I did have a live radio show, Tahmina Talks Immigration, that turned into a podcast. And, I was already writing, as I mentioned, but I never thought of myself as a creative. But as COVID came along and I was meditating more, and I realized I wanted to do more, and I was looking at nature. I've now given a name to photography. I mean, photography exists. I never thought of myself as a photographer, but I was taking pictures of my daughters. Life was so busy before COVID. You're rushing to get from one place to another, barely getting into bed, and doing that again the next day. I always wanted to take pictures of my daughters. And as COVID happened, I thought it was going to be 1 month. And I really wanted to use that 1 month. And I dressed them up, and I was playing doll with them, basically. And I got my big camera out and took pictures that became part of my Christmas card, holiday card. But I didn't still think of myself as a photographer. And then in 2021, as I'm writing more and I'm really in awe of nature more than I ever have been, and I'm taking photos, I am now realizing I am a creative. I can put words to it. I can articulate that I do have hobbies. Because I don't know about you, Jeremy, but when people say, do you have a hobby? I keep thinking, no, I don't have a hobby. I don't, when do you have time for a hobby? But now these are my hobbies. I love it. I can't wait to wake up in the morning and start writing and, looking at the sunrise and taking pictures. And now I've got my large camera. I'm taking pictures of birds now. I never really realized I'm a closet bird watcher. So I'm trying to get, magazines on birds. But now in 2021, I think is a pivotal year for me because I've come out of the previous administration's inner growth spurts for me. And now I can utilize and challenge it, channel it towards change, but also make sure that my soul is fed and is fed with these creative energies.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to wind this up. But before we go, I want you to tell folks where they can find you and follow you and find your books.
Well, thank you again, Jeremy, for having me. It's been an honor to speak with you and to be a guest and to speak with fellow lawyers, because all my life I just wanted to be lawyers, and now I feel like I need to tell my story. I can be found on Twitter at Tahmina Watson, on LinkedIn at Tahmina Watson. My website is watsonimmigrationlaw.com. And if you have any interest in immigration law at all, you can follow my blog, of course, which is watsonimmigrationlaw.blog. I am now a regular columnist on Above the Law. Thank you, Above the Law, for having me. And I'm on. You can't not find me. I'm everywhere. Just Google. But thank you again for asking and having this, giving me this opportunity. Oh, my podcast! I must mention my podcast.
Yes.
Tahmina Talks Immigration is on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else that you hear your podcasts. And I'm actually recording a series called the Startup Visa that will go hand in hand with my second edition of my book. But the Legal Heroes book was actually an outgrowth of a podcast series called The Legal Heroes. So all of the Legal Heroes have their own podcast episodes.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at richterjw. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.